If you've ever watched CNN and spotted a conservative actually making sense, you were probably watching Scott Jennings, whose sharp wit and common sense commentary have made waves across the political spectrum. Now, with growing speculation about a possible Senate run, his message is more timely than ever. And today we share an exclusive speech from Jennings exposing the growing censorship of the left and calling for a return to common sense and free speech. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candi Cushman. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Speak Up Virginia. And I'm excited that we have with us today to join me, Bruce Schlesman from Family Foundation Action. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about Scott Jennings, otherwise known as the black sheep conservative of CNN.
The only one.
Yeah, you think
like
he's the only one?
Yeah.
So a few months ago, we had the blessing of having him as the keynote speaker at our Nova dinner, and he really shared his heart. And we're going to share that exclusive speech with you today. But before we get into that, Bruce, I just want to talk to you briefly because there's rumors flying around that he's thinking about running for Senate.
Yeah, so he already met with President Trump a while ago, but then it's kind of gone quiet since. There's been a few big names that have stepped in what's going to be truly a barn burner of a primary, so we'll see. But it would be a lot of fun to watch him in the Senate. He'd instantly become the most fun senator we have. So
it would be fun. And it's for McConnell's seat, right?
Yeah, it is. It is for Mitch McConnell's seat. And he was a staffer for McConnell. So he has history in that seat. Okay. He's obviously from Kentucky. He still has ties there. You know, I think he lives in D.C. right now, but he could easily move back. And I think his family's still there.
Okay, well, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's interesting because, as I said, this speech gave us a chance to hear from his heart, the heart from someone that's going to be probably a player one way or the other. And he talks about censorship of the left, how the left just seems to be all about that, and how we have contrast in that in the conservative movement because we're all about free speech, getting in the fray, as he demonstrates from being the only conservative on CNN. So without further ado, let's hear from Scott.
As I mentioned, my wife and I have a big family back in Kentucky. We have 4 boys, 3 dogs, 35 chickens, all laying hens. Never get a rooster, by the way. I accidentally acquired a rooster once. They're not, we just collect the eggs. I don't need a rooster for other activities. But he didn't know that. And the roosters, they crow all day, and they're in constant harassment of their coworkers. I named him Governor Cuomo, is what I called him. But I finally traded him for other hens, so. We have a lot going on in the Jennings household, as you can see, and when I think about those boys and their futures and what they're going to do, I don't want them to just grow up in a rich country. I want them to grow up in a good country that believes in truth over narratives, that protects free speech and rejects censorship, that celebrates family, and that defends life, born and unborn. A country that does not apologize for its faith, its history, or its heroes. And that's why I'm in the fight. That's why you're in the fight. And that's why events like tonight's event matter. Because if we don't speak up, who will? If we don't defend the truth, who will? If we don't show up, the spaces that we abandon will be filled by people who despise everything that we cherish. Tonight I want to offer some thoughts and observations on the state of our national political affairs, our political media, what it's like to be the black sheep of CNN, which the British tabloid media delights in calling me after they cover our on-air debates. It's been an interesting year for me, to say the least. I had to give credit to my employer, CNN, for seeing the value in having at least one lonely person to speak for half the country. Or in some cases, 80% of the country. It's true, Bill Maher once did call me Lonely Scott. Even Bill Maher is standing up for me right now. But truthfully, I don't feel lonely, because over the last several months, an amazing online community has grown up around these debates that we're having on CNN. People who haven't watched CNN for years, or maybe have never watched CNN, or tuning in, or at least they're seeing clips of this on our social media feeds. I think at a minimum, what we're doing at 10 o'clock on the Abby Show at night is making cable news interesting and watchable again. And it's informative too. I think television is sort of boring when you have 5 or 6 people who all agree sitting around congratulating each other on their increasing levels of smugness. We don't learn anything from that. And that sort of TV plunges us further into these ideological bubbles that are destroying our collective ability to disagree with each other. These conversations among Republicans and Democrats, among rural and urban, among women and men, young and old, this is a normal thing, or at least it should be considered a normal thing. It's a good thing. It's a necessary thing. It doesn't mean we'll always agree, but the simple act of conversation and debate, the exchange of discourse, is a tie that has bound us together as Americans for 250 years. We argue, sometimes heated. We campaign, usually extremely heated. And then we vote. And we do it all again in 2 years hence. And 2 years after that, and 2 years after that. And so on and so forth. And that's the way we do it in America, folks, and it's worked out pretty well so far. I heard a leading Democratic congresswoman say on television the other day, well, I don't even know if we'll have elections in 4 years. She was explaining why Donald Trump must be resisted at all costs. I know, it's Jasmine Crockett. I'm sure you knew that already. The unquestioned leader of the Democratic Party. She does a lot of TV. I wrote her a letter. I said, you should do 10 times as much. I think it's amazing. But what a corrosive statement. The fabric of our democracy has been tested at times, but to introduce these sorts of ideas that the next election might be canceled undermines faith in the system. We heard it all throughout 2024. Oh, this is the last election we'll ever have. The sad part is when you speak these things out loud, there are certain people who take them seriously. I can't tell if people like Crockett believe this crazy talk or not, but I know what they're doing. It's bubble speak. It's the catering to the fever swamps of the left-wing fringe. And it worries me. But that's what the left thrives on. Apocalyptic doomsday tales told to them by low IQ congresswomen and news anchors on MSNBC. They love the bubble, but they cannot stand ever being confronted with an opinion that challenges their own. Now I prefer, and conservatives should prefer, to be in the arena instead of in the bubble. We learn more in the arena. We learn more about ourselves, and we learn more about each other. I was on TV the other night with a guy who really hates Donald Trump. No surprise, given where I work. But what was noteworthy about the exchange was that halfway through the conversation, I realized I might be the only Republican that he's ever met. And we're doing it on live TV. I could tell as he was going on and unspooling about Trump. These rants, by the way, they always end the same way. Some variation of the person concluding, and that's why Donald Trump is shredding the Constitution. So I did this guy a favor. I asked him a question. How is Donald Trump shredding the Constitution? He was stunned. But he proceeded to answer. He said, well, Trump has taken over the military. Again, this is all happening on live television. I said, well, you know, sir, that under our system, the president is actually the commander-in-chief of the military. This man looked at me like I had invented the wheel. I've never seen somebody with a more shocked look upon their face. And it was apparent to me in the moment that he had never, ever been pushed on any of his rants before, and that he truly, deeply had no idea the U.S. Constitution, in fact, makes the president the commander-in-chief of the military. I try not to be too hard on the people that they run out there against me night after night. But for this guy, I'm going to make an exception. It's an amazing clip. His name is Touré, by the way. You should look it up sometime. It's amazing. I can abide different opinions, but I cannot abide someone being handed this valuable thing, a chance to talk to millions of people on national television about the serious issues of the day, and coming into that conversation less prepared to discuss American civics than your average third grader. I find myself running into people like this all the time. Just a complete lack of knowledge, zero self-awareness, and yet the most confidence any of us could possibly ever hope to muster. It's breathtaking, actually. In your lives, I'm sure each of you manage important things. Are you allowed to be so cavalier in your personal and professional responsibilities? Of course you're not. And as conservatives in the public square, we're always held to a higher standard, aren't we? But I wonder, why are people on the left so cavalier when it comes to managing our public discourse? Is it not just as important to tell the truth, to debate in good faith, to offer a fair representation of the issues of the day, to at a minimum, not embarrass yourself in front of millions of people? But in the media, we tend to overlook this kind of mismanagement, and we recirculate the same kinds of people who are guilty of it over and over and over again. And we wonder why trust in the media and viewership is falling precipitously. I've been at this job at CNN for actually almost 8 years now. I've seen a lot of people come and go. It is my fervent wish for us to do better, as a media industry in general. Just do better. Make a better product. Don't crush dissenting viewpoints. Encourage debate. Find the best faith actors that you can and let them rekindle the debating spirit that launched this country in the first place. We have to encourage authenticity. We have to reward honesty and integrity. And we have to ensure that the entire country is represented at the table, not just a narrow ideological profile.
Agree.
That is a winning future for my industry and, frankly, for any industry. Before I joined CNN in 2017, I had a fairly long career in politics. It started in 2000 with George W. Bush for president. That was my first paid gig. And my first boss as a young man in politics was Mitch McConnell, for whom I licked envelopes as a teenager and have been a personal friend and advisor now going on 26 years. I served in the Bush 43 White House with Doug Domenech over there. He was a great American, by the way. I work for Mitt Romney. I've consulted on dozens of campaigns around the country, and today my job involves explaining Donald Trump to our audience and to all my panel mates and to rebutting objectively crazy things. It has been an unusual journey, and I've lived through, just as you have, 25 years of political upheaval, especially inside of the Republican Party. And I get asked often, how do you go from Bush to McConnell to Romney to Trump? What is the ideology of the Republican Party? It's a good question. Some things about the party are changing, and you heard a little bit of it from the governor here tonight. I think the through line that endures is more clear to the average Republican than it has ever been. The Republicans are simply just the party of common sense. And each of the leaders that I mentioned in their moment was the clearest defender of Western civilization in the arena at that time. And if you want one more reason for good measure, it's that the Republican Party believes that the fundamental and irreplaceable right to free speech must be defended at all costs. Now, my personal opinion is that today, only one party is fully committed to this idea. That's not to say there aren't individual Democrats that I think are pro-America and pro-free speech and generally pro-Western civilization. I count among my good friends David Axelrod and Van Jones, my fellow CNN commentators who happen to be Democrats. They're good men. I think what we do on the air is valuable because we open our hearts and our ears to each other before we open our mouths. And both Axe and Van understand the value in platforming voices from across the spectrum. and from different walks of life. They believe in the debate. But I fear that that attitude is falling out of vogue. Let us not forget that this is a nation founded on debate and free speech. Recall from your history lessons the pamphlet wars around the Constitutional Convention, or the Lincoln-Douglas debates, or any of the passionate arguments made for or against legislation in Richmond. This is the essence of our political culture, the ability to debate and to reason with one another and to achieve an outcome born of that intellectual exercise. But today, the culture of cancellation and the unwillingness of so many people to step outside of their ideological bubble to try to understand their fellow citizen endangers the American experiment. Today, I think the right and the left are headed in very different directions. And I'm afraid the left, here and abroad, has become a movement of censorship and illiberalism. It's dangerous stuff. Over in Europe, they'll throw you in jail if you post the wrong meme on Facebook. In several European countries, opposition political leaders have been jailed by ruling governments. And lest you think it cannot happen here, let me remind you that the oldest newspaper in America had its social media account shut down in October of 2020. For what? Accurately reporting on what was the next president of the United States. And the Democratic Party spent considerable time and your money trying to jail the current president of the United States. Now, even as we gather here tonight, there are people across this country vandalizing Tesla vehicles, firebombing dealerships and charging stations. I'm sure you've seen the videos. It's domestic terrorism, in my opinion. In Minnesota just last week, somebody who had done $20,000 worth of damage to Tesla vehicles heard from a judge they were going to get off scot-free, no charges. Why is all this happening? Because a guy who makes cars and used to be a Democrat decided to vote for Trump and go to work in his government. That's it. That's Elon's sin. He made a political choice. He engaged in political speech. And now he and his workers and his customers are all paying for it. Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, and last year's Democratic candidate for vice president. Boy, we dodged a bullet with this guy. There is not a bigger buffoon in American politics. There is not anyone in over their head in their job in America more than Tim Walz. He now pulls out his phone during his speeches and he says, "I'm watching the Tesla stock ticker. It gives me a boost when it goes down." Now, this company has 80,000 American workers, and the state of Minnesota owns like 1.8 million shares of Tesla. This is utter derangement. Here's a quote from Walz about Elon. "I'm not a vindictive person, but I take great pleasure in the fact that this guy's life is going to get very, very difficult." The message that you should take away from this attitude is clear and unmistakable. Silence yourself or we will do it for you. Jimmy Kimmel, the late-night comedian, led his audience the other night in hoops and hollers for Tesla to fail. He delivered an unsubtle message that he's A-okay with the vandalism taking place against the company. I encourage you to watch the video. He's very clear, and more alarmingly, his audience could not get enough of it. Silence yourselves, or we will do it for you. The other day, liberal comedian Bill Maher had the audacity to have dinner with Donald Trump. And then he talked about it on his show. This led to enormous backlash from the left. And even his fellow comedian, Larry David, took to the pages of the New York Times to compare Trump to Hitler and rip the bark off of Maher, who actually has been one of the most vicious and consistent critics of Donald Trump for 3 decades. What a world when someone like Bill Maher can't even accept a dinner invitation from the president without undergoing character assassination from his own side. Silence yourselves or we will do it for you. That's the message. The complaints about that dinner, by the way, were not about the dinner. They're about the next one. it's a warning to the next person. Do not speak. The stench of censorship and intimidation is right on the edge of our politics, and it must be rejected. Let me talk about President Trump for a moment. Actually, let me tell you a quick story. I met him for the first time in February. It's funny, he's dominated my professional existence for almost a decade, but I didn't meet him until the other day. I went to the Oval Office, in fact, to pitch him on this idea for a book, which I'm happy to report will come out later this year. So I go to the Oval Office, they open the door, and I walk in, and he's got almost a whole cabinet in there. And he looks up from the Resolute desk and he says, "Look at this guy. You look terrific. I mean, you look great on television, but look at you in person." Does everybody here know Scott? He's like our best guy. Then the hammer. To be honest, he used to be a little bit average. But then I came along, and now he's terrific. You can buy the book later this year to hear the rest of it. Marco, listen to Scott. Scott, tell Marco what you would do about Greenland. But I'll tell you one thing. I think we were asking ourselves for 4 years, who's actually running the country? I can tell you unequivocally, Donald Trump is running the country. I readily admit that I did not get it at first. I just didn't get it. My dad actually was the first person to tell me that Donald Trump was going to be the next president. Way back early in 2015. My dad, the garbage man, the union factory worker, the old Clinton guy. He told me early. And of course I laughed at him, just like everyone else who'd been trained to believe that the status quo in American politics was unshakable. Boy, he was right and I was wrong. And I think about that interaction with my dad all the time. I was so certain, I was arrogant. But he was right and I was wrong. And from that point forward, it is incredible what has happened in our country and in our politics and in our culture. One of the reasons that I think Trump has been successful is that he has given millions of people who think they have no voice the feeling that someone finally speaks for them the way they would speak for themselves if given the chance. No longer, that's right. No longer do people desire that politicians speak perfectly. They want their leaders to speak authentically. Now, Trump's new coalition contains many people, millions of people who aren't connected to either party at all. People who have no interest in being labeled Democrat or Republican. But they have a lot of interest in feeling like they're voting for someone who embodies plain old common sense. To Trump's coalition, he represents a political and cultural axis that blends the restoration of common sense in our culture, the defense of Western civilization in our world, and the promotion of free speech for everyone. That's why the coalition is, shall we say, ideologically elastic. It has appeal across the political spectrum. Trump's party currently includes RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, Glenn Youngkin, and Hulk Hogan, who I met at the Republican National Convention. Childhood hero. They took me backstage to meet the Hulkster. He was so nervous. I met him right before he spoke. It was the greatest convention speech that anyone's ever given, by the way. If only because he ripped his shirt off. But he came out and the Hulkster's hand was shaking a little. And I said, "Are you nervous? What's the matter?" And he said, "I never do politics, brother." I I said, well, you body slammed Andre the Giant in front of 90,000 people. I think it'll be okay. And it was okay. It was a great speech. This coalition is really interesting and entertaining. And it also contains about 54% of Hispanic men, about a third of African American men under the age of 45, about 55% of all voters under the age of 30. I think the kids are going to be all right. You know, it's amazing, the left, with their draconian lockdowns during COVID, I think we warned them, but they have turned the kids who lived through that into the biggest conservatives in America right now. They're going to pay for it. This realignment is happening before our eyes. I called it on election night on CNN, the revenge of the average American who plays by the rules. By the way, it was 3:38 a.m. when they finally let me out of my cage. Much to Anderson Cooper's chagrin. Here comes Scott. It's the revenge of the average American who plays by the rules, pays their taxes, and simply wants to get up, go to work, provide for their families without being condescended to, insulted, or otherwise despised by the elites in Washington, D.C. And this political realignment coincides with the crisis of institutions we're happening in this country. Most people don't trust most institutions right now, including and perhaps especially the media. We can lament this crisis, sure, but the question is, do we deserve it? Yes. During the last 25 years, we've seen a dramatic fall of institutional, traditional, mainstream media as a trusted source of information. It gives me no pleasure to report this. I work there. And I believe strongly in a trusted free press that presents information fairly and clearly to the American people. But it's true. The mainstream media is struggling, and it's apparent in the most recent Gallup poll. Now, in 2004, when I worked for President Bush's re-election campaign, half the country had a great deal or a fair amount of trust in the media, just over 50%. Today, that number is 31%. And 36% say they have literally no trust in it at all. None. And Donald Trump has a higher approval rating than 36%, I can assure you. More people have no trust than a great deal or a fair amount. So what has happened as a result? People are looking elsewhere for information. They're more willing than ever, even eager, to question what they're told by official sources. Elon Musk has adopted a new tagline for his platform, X. He says, "We are the media now." He's doing with information what Trump did to politics in 2016. They both found a market demand for something different, and they both met the moment. With Trump, there was a market demand for something more authentic, something to break us free of the elite speak, the cookie-cutter politics that had everybody in here fuming, I'm sure. Trump's campaign in 2016 was essentially the beginning of the war on mindless babble in our politics. And his comeback in 2024 was the final battle against the political information distribution complex that dictates the narratives of our election coverage. Think about what you were told in October. Well, you know, Trump is a Nazi. Anyone who goes to a Republican rally is a Nazi. How do you think that sat with half the country? A comedian who spoke on stage at an event 3 hours before Donald Trump showed up has offended Puerto Rico. And we all know that if you offend Puerto Rico, Kamala Harris will win Pennsylvania. Trump is in danger of losing Iowa. The Oracle of Des Moines has spoken. The best pollster in America has spoken. He's going to lose Iowa. He's going to lose the whole Midwest. Harris will win. I could go on, but the political information distribution complex was wrong, 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 wrong. Why has the media fallen out of favor? Because in many cases, narratives are more important than the truth. Was a comedian's joke in October really going to make a bigger difference in the election than, say, I don't know, runaway inflation and runaway illegal immigration? Of course not. but you were force-fed a narrative that it was. It's the authenticity of truly free speech that is attracting audiences right now. The era of scripted puppets on TV or in politics, either one, is over. I think there are a few bright spots in mainstream media. We're trying something out on the 10 o'clock show on CNN. I think it's the only show like it on cable TV. It's a debating show. We don't use scripts. We just talk and debate. And I have to give credit to them for trying something new. We do well in the ratings and we're growing because we're popping ideological bubbles. My instincts tell me there is a hunger for more of it. More debate, more free speech, and more authentic conversations. And I think the politicians and the media figures who succeed in the future will be the ones who speak their own minds instead of someone else's. Yeah. Now, I've come to this conclusion after watching last year's election and pitying that Kamala Harris came along at the exact wrong time. I mean, she got outsmarted by Sonny Hosted on The View. Can you think of one thing you would have done differently than Joe Biden? And without a script in her hand, no, I can't think of anything. Wrong place, wrong time. Trust in media and politics is low because we're scarred by years of feeling like we are lied to by the people who are reading the scripts and sticking to these prescribed narratives instead of admitting what we could all see with our own eyes. COVID was the most illuminating period for this. Masks, 6 feet, 2 weeks to slow the spread. How many weeks are we into the 2 weeks to slow the spread? Where did the virus come from? Questioning any of these things at the time was enough to get you thrown out of polite society. And we absolutely destroyed a generation of children long after we knew the truth. We kept them out of school long after we knew. And yet we have not held a single person accountable. The line that runs through all of these examples, a lot of opinions held by run-of-the-mill Americans turned out to be true, even as they were being told to sit down and shut up by the people who write the narratives. The more people feel lied to, the more they will turn to news sources, especially those people who are unafraid to courageously speak freely and question the official narratives. Despite all our challenges, I'm optimistic about America because we live in a fundamentally good place, full of good people, innovators who get up in the morning excited about new ideas, workers who dedicate blood and sweat to their professions, farmers who produce the food and fiber that feed and fuel our country and the world, parents who just want the best for their children, who get up early and stay up late trying to understand math homework. If anybody wants to help me with sophomore geometry, I'll be glad to take your advice after the show. And dedicated public servants like everyone in this room who do your level best to live up to your mandates and the trust that's placed in you by your constituents and the supporters of this organization. We're all just everyday Americans. And our shared purpose is to leave the nation a little better than we found it, so our children and grandchildren can do better than we did. To do this, we have to fight for what matters. I'm optimistic that free speech can and will be preserved. I'm optimistic about Western civilization. I think people are finally waking up to the barbarians at the gate all over this world. We must have absolute clarity in the fight between good and evil around the world. On October the 7th, the world saw barbarism at its worst when Hamas launched savage terrorist attacks in their assault on Israel. Let me be clear, there is no moral equivalence here. Israel was attacked, and Israel has a right to defend itself. The amount of propaganda about this conflict is outrageous. And the over-indexing of that propaganda on cable news is even more outrageous. I've worn this pin every night since October the 7th, and I'm going to keep wearing it until every hostage is home and until I stop hearing people go on television incapable of telling the difference between right and wrong. We should stand up for our friend, our ally, Israel. We believe in freedom, dignity, and civilization, and so do they. They're our friend. Hamas is the enemy. There's no excuse for terrorism. There's no excuse for evil. And there's no future for the forces of barbarism. Standing with Israel is not just a foreign policy question. It is a statement about who we are and where we're headed as a society, as a country, and as a civilization. If we can't tell the difference between civilization and savagery, then we're truly lost. But I think we still know the difference. And I think everyone in this room knows the difference. And I think as long as we remember it and fight for it, Western civilization will long endure. Now, I'm optimistic about America because no matter how dark the skies ever get, no matter how loud the voice of cynicism grow, no matter how many times they tell us we're on the wrong side of history, the simple truth is history is made by people who show up. And the American people who believe in faith, family, and freedom are showing up. You show up in your churches, you show up in your schools, you show up in your communities, and you show up at the ballot box. And because of all that, we'll endure. We fight for what matters, we fight for what is true, and we fight for what is good. We're fighting for the future of Western civilization in every election on your ballot this November.
Stay in the fight.
And I think that when Americans fight for the right things, everywhere from Virginia to the rest of the world will be a better place. So I want to thank you all for having me here tonight. God bless you. And may God continue to bless the Commonwealths of Virginia and Kentucky and all of the United States of America.
You know, I really appreciated how he brought hope. You know, he exposed the censorship, the disturbing things we see, like Tesla's getting attacked when people step out and that kind of thing that just shouldn't be happening in a country that values free speech. But he also gave us hope that, hey, we can return to being a country that is not apologizing for its faith, its history, and its heroes. What was your take on all that?
I mean, that was my favorite part, is just kind of a positive note of returning to a country about hope and heritage and faith. You know, that's what America was built on. And it does feel like for the first time in a long time, you're allowed to say those things. You're allowed to be proud to be American. You're allowed to be proud of your history, you know, America for Americans, as, you know, and so, yeah, I loved that part of the speech. And
you could say that you're part of the representative of young men, you know, voting for Trump. I mean, I know you had that in your heart before then, but it's just interesting that we're seeing more like you.
Yeah, and Gen Z men and Gen Z in general, but especially younger Gen Z, because it isn't just men, it's also like a lot of younger Gen Z women, like 18 to 22, but especially Gen Z men, like have huge rightward shift. They're very right wing. It's very exciting. And I mean, Trump, the realignment is something like I love talking about. I mean, he brought it up, but it's because it's truly exciting. But we are the party of the working class now. You know, we have the data to prove this. It's pretty much, you know, that's the way it is. Like voters over $100,000 annual income, they vote Democrat now. The old country club Republican, that's a Democrat voter now. The people that are voting Republican are mostly working class. They're mostly younger. They're mostly people who are more blue collar, like white working class, rural voters. They're really like a much like wider representation of America. Like Trump, I mean, with minority voters, like he added. I mean, most of his numbers of who he added were young people and minority voters, like of like what he brought into his coalition this past year. You look at every single demographic of every single race, age, whatever, he expanded his numbers.
Yeah. Well, as Scott Jennings said, you know, we are seeing a restoration of common sense, and he's got this book out, Revolution. I think it's called A Revolution of Common Sense. But if you want to be a part of what we are doing here at the Family Foundation, because part of this whole thing for bringing Scott Jennings out and talking about this was to help support the work we're doing every day to restore this common sense, especially when it comes to free speech, parental rights, protecting life, all of that. And if you want to help support that, just go to our website, familyfoundation.org. You'll see the recurring donation button or one-time gift button right up there at the top. You'll see the button in yellow. And you can do that now. It's an easy thing to do. We appreciate the support, whatever it is, whether it's financial or just responding to our calls to actions. Thank you so much for joining with us. Well, we'll be picking Bruce's brain more when we get closer to November. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to share our playlists, our Speak Up Virginia YouTube playlist. You can find that on the Family Foundation YouTube channel. See you next time. Remember, we are stronger when we speak together.